Section 6 of A Popular History of France, Volume 5. This recording is in the public domain. A Popular History of France from the Earliest Times, Volume 5, by François Guizot, translated by Robert Black. Chapter 36. Henry IV, Catholic King, 1593 to 1610. During the months, weeks, nay, it might be said, days immediately following Henry IV.'s abjuration, a great number of notable persons and important towns, and almost whole provinces, submitted to the Catholic king. Henry was reaping the fruits of his decision. France was flocking to him. But the general sentiments of a people are far from satisfying and subduing the selfish passions of the parties which have taken form and root in its midst. Religious and political peace responded to and sufficed for the desires of the great majority of Frenchmen, Catholic and Protestant. But it did not at all content the fanatics, Leaguer or Huguenot. The former wanted the complete extirpation of heretics; the latter, the complete downfall of Catholicism. Neither these nor those were yet educated up to the higher principle of religious peace, distinction between the civil and the intellectual order, freedom of thought and of faith guaranteed by political liberty. Even at the present day, the community of France, nation and government, all the while that they proclaim this great and salutary truth, do not altogether understand and admit its full bearing. The 16th century was completely ignorant of it. Leaguers and Huguenots were equally convinced that they possessed, in the matter of religion, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and that they were in their right to propagate its empire at any price. Thence arose, in respect of religious peace and of Henry IV., who naturally desired it as the requirement and the wish of France, a great governmental difficulty. It is honorable to human nature that it never submits freely and sincerely to anything but what it considers not only useful, but essentially true and just. Its passions bow to principles only. Wherever the higher principle is wanting, there also is wanting the force that compels respect from passion. Now the fanatics, Leaguer and Huguenot, had a fixed principle. With the former, it was the religious sovereignty of the pope, as representative and depositary of the unity of the Christian church. With the others, it was the negation of this sovereignty and the revindication of the free regimen of the primitive Christian church. To these fixed and peremptory principles the government of Henry IV. Had nothing similar to oppose. It spoke in the name of social interests, of the public peace, and of mutual toleration. All excellent reasons, but with merits consisting in their practical soundness, not in their logical connection with the superior principle to which the 16th century had not yet attained. It was all very well for Henry IV. To maintain the cause and to have the support of the great majority in France; but outside of this majority he was incessantly encountering and incessantly having to put down, or to humour, two parties, or rather factions, full of discontent and as irreconcilable with him as among themselves, for it was not peace and tolerance that they demanded of him, but victory and supremacy in the name of absolute right. This, then, was the scene. On one side, a great majority of Catholics and Protestants, favourable, for different practical reasons, to Henry IV. turned Catholic king; on the other, two minorities, one of stubborn Catholics of the League, the other of Protestants anxious for their creed and their liberty. Both discontented and distrustful. Such, after Henry IV.'s abjuration, was the striking feature in the condition of France and in the situation of her king. This triple fact was constantly present to the mind of Henry IV., and ruled his conduct during all his reign. All the acts of his government are proof of that. His first embarrassments arose from the faction of Catholics to the backbone. After his abjuration, just as much as at his accession, the League continued to exist and to act against him. The legate, Gaetani, maintained that the bishops of France had no right, without the pope's approval, to give an excommunicated prince absolution. He opposed the 3 months' truce concluded by Mayenne, and threatened to take his departure for Rome. Mayenne, to appease him and detain him, renewed the alliance between the League and Spain, prevailed upon the princes and marshals to renew also the oath of union, caused the States General of the League to vote the adoption of the Council of Trent, and, on proroguing them, August 8, 1593, received from them a promise to return at the expiration of the truce. For the members of that assembly it was not a burdensome engagement. Independently of the compensation they had from their provinces, which was 10 livres, or 36 francs 60 centimes, a day during each session, they received from the King of Spain a regular retainer, which raised it, for the 5 months from June to October, to 72,144 francs, which they divided between themselves. "It was presumed," said Jehan Huillier, provost of tradesmen, to one of his colleagues who was pressing him to claim this payment from the ambassador of Spain, "that the money came from M. de Mayenne, not from foreigners." But honest people, such as Du Vair and Thielment, did not content themselves with this presumption, and sent to the Hotel Dieu, for maintenance of the poor, the share which was remitted to them. Poirson, Histoire du règne de Henri IV, page 463. Picot, Histoire des Etats Généraux, page 249. The States General of the League did not appear again. Their prorogation was their death. The year 1594, which came after them, was for Henry IV. A year of home conquests, some pacific and due to the spontaneous movement of the inhabitants, others obtained after resistance and purchased with gold. The town of Lyons set the example of the first. A rumor spread that the Spaniards were preparing an expedition against it. Some burgesses met to consult, and sent a private message to Alphonse d'Ornano, who was conducting the war for the king in Dauphiny, pressing him to move forward, on a day appointed, to the Faubourg de la Guillotière. A small force sent by Ornano arrived, accordingly, on the 7th of February, about daybreak, at the foot of the bridge over the Rhone in the Faubourg, and, after a stubborn resistance, dislodged the outpost on duty there. At sound of the fighting, excitement broke out in the town, and barricades were thrown up, amidst shouts of "Hurrah for French liberty!" without any mention of the king's name. The archbishop, Peter d'Espignac, a staunch Leaguer, tried to intimidate the burgesses, or, at any rate, to allay the excitement. As he made no impression, he retired into his palace. The people arrested the sheriffs and seized the arsenal. The king's name resounded everywhere. "The noise of the cheering was such," says de Thou, "that there was no hearing the sound of the bells. Everybody assumed the white scarf with so much zeal that by evening there was not a scrap of white silk left at the tradesmen's. Tables were laid in the streets, the king's arms were put up on the gates and in the public thoroughfares." Ornano marched in over the barricades. Royalist sheriffs were substituted for the Leaguer sheriffs, and hastened to take the oath of allegiance to the king, who had nothing to do but thank the Lyonnese for having been the first to come over to him without constraint or any exigency, and who confirmed by an edict all their municipal liberties. At the very moment when the Lyonnese were thus springing to the side of their king, there set out from Lyons the first assassin who raised a hand against Henry IV., Peter Parrière, a poor boatman of the Loire, whom an unhappy passion for a girl in the household of Marguerite de Valois and the preachings of fanatics had urged on to this hateful design. Assassin we have called him, although there was not on his part so much as an attempt at assassination. But he had, by his own admission, projected and made preparations for the crime, to the extent of talking it over with accomplices and sharpening the knife he had purchased for its accomplishment. Having been arrested at Melun and taken to Paris, he was sentenced to capital punishment, and to all the tortures that ingenuity could add to it. He owned to everything, whilst cursing those who had assured him that, "if he died in the enterprise, his soul, uplifted by angels, would float away to the bosom of God, where he would enjoy eternal bliss." Moved by his torments and his repentance, the judge who presided at his execution took upon himself to shorten it by having him strangled. The judge was reported to the king for this indulgence. Henry praised him for it, adding that he would have pardoned the criminal if he had been brought before him. Thus commenced, at the opening of his reign, the series of attempts to which he was destined to succumb, after 17 years of good, able, generous, and mild government. In Normandy, at Rouen, the royalist success was neither so easy nor so disinterested as it had been at Lyons. Andrew de Bracat, Lord of Villars, an able man and valiant soldier, was its governor. He had served the League with zeal and determination. Nevertheless, "from the month of August, 1593, immediately after the king's conversion, he had shown a disposition to become his servant, and to incline thereto all those whom he had in his power." Histoire du Parlement de Normandie, by M. Floquet, pages 611 to 617. Henry IV. commissioned Rosny to negotiate with him; and Rosny went into Normandy, to Louviers first and then to Rouen itself. The negotiation seemed to be progressing favorably, but a distrustful whim in regard to Villars, and the lofty pretensions he put forward, made Rosny hang back for a while, and tell the whole story to the king, at the same time asking for his instructions. Henry replied, "My friend, you are an ass to employ so much delay, and import so many difficulties and manoeuvres into a business the conclusion of which is of so great importance to me for the establishment of my authority and the relief of my people. Do you no longer remember the counsels you have so many times given to me, while setting before me as an example that given by a certain Duke of Milan to King Louis XI. at the time of the war called that of the common weal? It was to split up, by considerations of private interest, all those who were leagued against him on general pretexts. That is what I desire to attempt now, far preferring that it should cost twice as much to treat separately with each individual as it would to arrive at the same results by means of a general treaty concluded with a single leader, who, in that way, would be enabled to keep up still an organized party within my dominions. You know plenty of folks who wanted to persuade me to that. Wherefore, do not any longer waste your time in doing either so much of the respectful towards those whom you wot of, and whom we will find other means of contenting, or of the economical by sticking at money. We will pay everything with the very things given up to us, the which, if they had to be taken by force, would cost us 10 times as much. Seeing, then, that I put entire trust in you and love you as a good servant, do not hesitate any longer to make absolute and bold use of your power, which I further authorize by this letter, so far as there may be further need for it, and settle as soon as possible with M. de Villars. But secure matters so well that there may be no possibility of a slip, and send me news thereof promptly, for I shall be in constant doubt and impatience until I receive it. And then, when I am peaceably king, we will employ the excellent manoeuvres of which you have said so much to me, and you may rest assured that I will spare no travail and fear no peril in order to raise my glory and my kingdom to the height of splendor. Adieu, my friend. Senlis, this 18th day of March, 1594." Amongst the pretensions made by Villars there was one which could not be satisfied without the consent of a man still more considerable than he, and one with whom Henry IV. was obliged to settle: Biron. Villars had received from Mayenne the title and office of Admiral of France, and he wished, at any price, to retain them on passing over to the king's service. Now Henry IV. had already given this office to Biron, who had no idea of allowing himself to be stripped of it. It was all very fine to offer him in exchange the baton of a marshal of France, but he would not be satisfied with it. "It was necessary," says M. Floquet, Histoire du Parlement de Normandie, pages 613 to 616, "for the king's sister, Princess Catherine, to intervene. At last a promise of 120,000 crowns won Biron over, though against the grain." But he wanted solid securities. Attention was then turned to the Parliament of Caen, always so ready to do anything and sacrifice anything. Saldaigne d'Incarville, comptroller general of finance, having been despatched to Caen, went straight to the palace and reported to the Parliament the proposals and conditions of Villars and Biron. "The king," said he, "not having been able to bring Rouen to reason by process of arms, and being impatient to put some end to these miseries, wishes now to try gentle processes, and treat with those whom he has not yet been able to subdue. But co operation on the part of the sovereign bodies of the provinces is necessary." "To that which is for the good of our service is added your private interest," wrote Henry IV. to the Parliament of Caen. And his messenger, d'Incarville, added, "I have left matters at Rouen so arranged as to make me hope that, before a fortnight is over, you will be free to return thither and enter your homes once more." At the first mention of peace and the prospect of a reconciliation between the royalist Parliament of Caen and the Leaguer Parliament of Rouen, the Parliament, the Exchequer Chamber, and the Court of Taxation agreed to a fresh sacrifice and a last effort. The 4 presidents of the Parliament lost no time in signing, together, and each for all, an engagement to guarantee the 120,000 crowns promised to Biron. The members of the body bound themselves all together to guarantee the 4 presidents, in their turn, in respect of the engagement they were contracting, and a letter was addressed on the spot to Henry IV., "to thank the monarch for his good will and affection, and the honor he was doing the members of his Parliament of Normandy by making them participators in the means and overtures adopted for arriving at the reduction of the town of Rouen." M. Floquet, Histoire du Parlement de Normandie, pages 613 to 616. Here is the information afforded, as regards the capitulation of Villars to Henry IV., by the statement, drawn up by Sully himself, of "the amount of all debts on account of all the treaties made for the reduction of districts, towns, places, and persons to obedience unto the king, in order to the pacification of the realm." "To Monsieur Villars, for himself, his brother Chevalier d'Oise, the towns of Rouen and Havre and other places, as well as for compensation which had to be made to Messieurs de Montpensier, Marshal de Biron, Chancellor de Chiverny, and other persons included in his treaty, 3,447,800 livres." Poirson, Histoire du règne de Henri IV, page 667. These details have been entered into without hesitation, because it is important to clearly understand by what means, by what assiduous efforts, and at what price, Henry IV. Managed to win back pacifically many provinces of his kingdom, rally to his government many leaders of note, and finally to confer upon France that territorial and political unity which she lacked under the feudal regimen, and which, in the 16th century, the religious wars all but put it beyond her power to acquire. To the two instances just cited of royalist reconciliation, Lyons and the spontaneous example set by her population, and Rouen and the dearly purchased capitulation of her governor Villars, must be added a third, of a different sort. Nicholas de Neufville, Lord of Villeroy, after having served Charles IX. And Henry III., had become, through attachment to the Catholic cause, a member of the League, and one of the Duke of Mayenne's confidants. When Henry IV. Was King of France and Catholic king, Villeroy tried to serve his cause with Mayenne, and induce Mayenne to be reconciled with him. Meeting with no success, he made up his mind to separate from the League, and go over to the king's service. He could do so without treachery or shame; even as a Leaguer and a servant of Mayenne's, he had always been opposed to Spain, and devoted to a French, but at the same time a faithfully Catholic policy. He imported into the service of Henry IV. The same sentiments and the same bearing. He was still a zealous Catholic, and a partisan, for king and country's sake, of alliance with Catholic powers. He was a man of wits, experience, and resource, who knew Europe well, and had some influence at the court of Rome. Henry IV. Saw at once the advantage to be gained from him, and, in spite of the Protestants' complaints and his sister Princess Catherine's prayers, made him, on the 25th of September, 1594, Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs. This acquisition did not cost him so dear as that of Villars. Still, we read in the statement of sums paid by Henry IV. for this sort of conquest, "Furthermore, to M. de Villeroy, for himself, his son, the town of Pontoise, and other individuals, according to their treaty, 476,594 livres." It is quite true that this statement was drawn up by Sully, the unwavering supporter of Protestant alliances in Europe, and, as such, Villeroy's opponent in the council of Henry IV. But the other contemporary documents confirm Sully's assertion. Villeroy was a faithful servant to Henry, who well repaid him by staunchness in supporting him against the repeated attacks of violent Reformers. In 1594, when he became minister of foreign affairs, the following verse was in vogue at the Louvre: "The king could never beat the League; 'twas Villeroy who did the thing. So well he managed his intrigue, that now the League hath got the king." It is quite certain, however, that Henry IV. Was never of the opinion expressed in that verse; for 10 years later, in 1604, Villeroy, having found himself much compromised by the treachery of a chief clerk in his department, who had given up to the Spanish government some important despatches, the king, though very vexed at this mishap, "the consequences of which rankled in his heart far more than he allowed to appear openly, nevertheless continued to look most kindly on Villeroy, taking the trouble to call upon him, to console and comfort him under this annoyance, and not showing him a suspicion of mistrust because of what had happened, any more than formerly, nay, even less." Journal de l'Estoile, pp. 85 to 441. Never had prince a better or nobler way of employing confidence in his proceedings with his servants, old or new, at the same time that he made clear sighted and proper distinctions between them. Section 7.